Parents, when did you love your child for doing the wrong thing? I was folding laundry in my living room when a police car pulled up in my driveway, and an officer helped my 8-year-old daughter Alexa out of the back seat. She was supposed to be at school presenting her science fair project. Instead, she was walking up my front steps with her backpack dragging behind her and tear stains on her cheeks. I yanked open the door before they could knock. The officer was young and looked uncomfortable as she held Alexa's hand. My daughter wouldn't look at me and kept staring at her light-up sneakers that I'd bought her specifically for today. "What's going on here?" I asked. The officer glanced down at Alexa and then back at me with this expression that made my stomach drop. She cleared her throat and adjusted her radio before speaking in that careful tone police use when delivering bad news. "Ma'am, is there somewhere we can talk in private? I don't think we should talk about any of this in front of your daughter. It might trigger her again." Trigger her again. Those words echoed in my head as I sent Alexa to her room. She trudged up the stairs without arguing, and that's when I noticed the color red on her skirt. I led the officer to my kitchen and watched her sit heavily in one of my wooden chairs, like she'd had the longest day of her life. "Can I have a glass of water?" she asked, rubbing her temples. I filled a glass from the tap and handed it to her. She drank it in nearly one gulp like she'd been in the desert, then finally explained that today was indeed the science fair at Lincoln Elementary. Alexa had arrived early with her project about how different liquids affect plant growth. She'd set everything up perfectly with her poster board, and her little plants in labeled cups. According to witnesses, Alexa kept checking and rechecking that everything was in place. The problem started when Mrs. Houston, Alexa's teacher, told her that her project paper needed to be rewritten in pen instead of pencil. It was a rule clearly stated in the science fair packet, but Alexa had forgotten. My daughter had begged for 5 more minutes and Mrs. Houston had allowed it. Alexa ran back to the classroom to quickly rewrite everything in pen. The officer paused here and took a deep breath. She explained that when Alexa returned to the gymnasium, she found Mrs. Houston standing near her project. Alexa became convinced that her teacher was tampering with it. She tried to turn on the grow light we'd bought specifically for the project, but it wouldn't work. The battery pack seemed dead even though we'd put fresh batteries in that morning. According to multiple witnesses, Alexa started screaming at Mrs. Houston. She accused her teacher of sabotaging her project because she was jealous. She said Mrs. Houston had always hated her and never gave her the grades she deserved. The teacher tried to calm Alexa down, but my daughter was beyond reasoning at that point. The officer shifted in her seat and I could tell we were getting to the worst part. She said Alexa was still holding the pen she'd used to rewrite her paper. In her fury and frustration, my sweet 8-year-old daughter had stabbed Mrs. Houston in the thigh with that pen. It went deep enough to require stitches, and Mrs. Houston had fallen to the ground screaming while Alexa stood there sobbing. Other teachers had rushed over to help while someone called 911. They'd found Alexa curled up under her project table crying so hard she couldn't breathe. She kept saying it wasn't fair and that she was supposed to win. The paramedics had to check her over before the police could transport her home. I felt like I couldn't breathe as the officer continued. She explained that Alexa was suspended indefinitely pending a formal expulsion hearing. The school had a zero-tolerance policy for violence, and what Alexa did counted as assault with a weapon. My 8-year-old had a police report filed about her. The science fair project she'd worked so hard on was evidence now. The officer stood up and handed me her card saying someone from Child Services might be in touch. I walked her to the door in a daze thinking this nightmare couldn't get worse. But as she stepped onto my porch, she turned back with one more piece of information that shattered me completely. Mrs. Houston's husband called the station while I was driving here. They're planning to sue for damages. He mentioned the figure of $800,000 for medical bills and pain and suffering. You'll want to contact a lawyer immediately. I watched the police car back out of my driveway and stood there holding the door handle for what felt like forever. My legs wouldn't move even though I knew I needed to check on Alexa. The officer's words kept repeating in my head about the lawsuit and Mrs. Houston's husband. $800,000 was more than our house was worth. I finally forced myself to turn around and climb the stairs to Alexa's room. She was curled up in a ball on her pink bedspread with her backpack still on her shoulders. The red stain on her skirt looked darker now against the white fabric. I sat on the edge of her bed and tried to help her take off the backpack, but she pulled away from me. When I reached for the skirt, she started screaming like I was hurting her. I backed out of her room and closed the door behind me. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my phone twice trying to call my husband. His work number went straight to voicemail the first time. The second call just rang and rang while I paced the hallway. On the third try, his assistant answered and said he was in a meeting. I told her it was an emergency about our daughter and she put me through. My husband's voice sounded confused when he picked up, but I could barely get the words out. I kept starting sentences and stopping because nothing made sense. Finally, I just said Alexa hurt her teacher and the police brought her home. He said he was leaving right now and would be home in an hour. My phone started buzzing with text messages as soon as I hung up. 3 different moms from Alexa's class were asking if everything was okay. One of them sent a video someone took at the science fair. I clicked on it and saw my daughter's face twisted up with anger as she screamed at Mrs. Houston. The video was shaky, but you could see Alexa holding something in her hand. I turned it off before the bad part happened. More texts kept coming in asking what happened and if the rumors were true. I put my phone on silent and walked through the house looking for anything sharp. The kitchen scissors went in a grocery bag along with all the steak knives. I grabbed the letter opener from the desk and the sewing kit from the closet. Even the pencils seemed dangerous now, so I threw those in too. The garage had a storage cabinet with a padlock that we used for paint and chemicals. I shoved everything inside and locked it up tight. My husband's car pulled into the driveway 45 minutes later, and he ran inside still wearing his work badge. We went upstairs together to try talking to Alexa, but she wouldn't look at us. She kept saying Mrs. Houston broke her grow light on purpose to make her lose. We tried explaining that batteries die sometimes, but she wouldn't listen. She said Mrs. Houston always hated her and gave her bad grades. Her voice got louder and louder until she was yelling again. My husband and I went back downstairs and I called our pediatrician's office. The receptionist could tell something was wrong from my voice and transferred me right away. The on-call nurse listened while I explained what happened at the school. She said Alexa needed a psychiatric evaluation today, not tomorrow. She gave me 3 phone numbers for crisis centers that took our insurance. While my husband stayed with Alexa, I found the science fair packet in the kitchen drawer. We'd gotten it 6 weeks ago with all the rules and deadlines. Page 2 had a whole section about presentation requirements highlighted in yellow marker. Right there in bold letters it said all written work must be in pen, not pencil. I should have checked her project that morning before school. I should have made sure she had everything right. I opened my laptop and searched for lawyers who handle juvenile cases. Rania Howell's website came up first with good reviews and a phone number. Her assistant answered on the second ring and I explained our situation. She said Rania could do a phone consultation at 4 o'clock today. I spent the next 20 minutes writing down everything I could remember. What time the police came and what the officer said and what Alexa was wearing. Around 2 in the afternoon, Alexa finally cried herself to sleep on her bed. I carefully pulled off her skirt while she was sleeping and put it in a plastic bag. The blood spot was smaller than I expected, but it still made me feel sick. I didn't know if I should wash it or keep it for evidence. At exactly 4 o'clock, my phone rang, and Rania Howell introduced herself. She had a calm voice that made me feel less panicked. She explained the difference between criminal charges and civil lawsuits. She said the school might press charges for assault with a weapon. The family could also sue us for medical bills and pain and suffering. She told me not to let Alexa talk to anyone about what happened. We needed to delete all our social media accounts right away. I should call our homeowner's insurance company before they close today. She said they might cover some of the lawsuit, but maybe not all of it. The call lasted 30 minutes and she gave me a list of things to do. I hung up feeling scared, but at least I had a plan now. I opened my laptop and typed an email to the principal asking for a meeting about Alexa's situation. The auto reply came back right away with corporate language about student safety and district protocols. My husband started making dinner while I helped Alexa wash her face and change into pajamas. She wouldn't eat anything and kept asking if the police were coming back to take her away. We sat with her until she finally fell asleep around 9, then stayed up talking about lawyers and money and what would happen next. At 7 the next morning, someone knocked hard on our front door. A man in a button-down shirt and khakis stood on our porch holding a clipboard and badge. He introduced himself as Allie Finch from Child Protective Services and said he needed to assess our home and interview us separately. I let him in while my husband went to check on Alexa, who was still sleeping. Allie walked through every room taking notes about locks on cabinets and whether we had smoke detectors. He asked about our discipline methods and if we'd ever hit Alexa or used physical punishment. He wanted to know about any mental health issues in our family and whether we kept weapons in the house. After looking through Alexa's room, he sat us down at the kitchen table and explained we'd need a safety plan. We had to agree to constant supervision of Alexa and show proof she was getting therapy. I signed whatever papers he gave me without really reading them. While Allie was still there, I called around trying to find a child psychologist who could see Alexa soon. The third office I tried had a cancellation tomorrow afternoon with Omar Rivas, who specialized in behavioral crises. The receptionist asked me to write down Alexa's whole developmental history before we came. I spent the rest of the day making phone calls and filling out forms while my husband stayed home from work to watch Alexa. She mostly stayed in her room coloring the same picture over and over, pressing so hard the crayons broke. Around 3 o'clock, the mail carrier knocked and handed me a certified letter from the school district. The formal suspension notice said Alexa couldn't return to any district property during the investigation. The expulsion hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks from now. I put the letter in my growing pile of terrible paperwork and went to check on Alexa again. She was sitting on her floor sorting her stuffed animals by size in perfect rows. The doorbell rang around 4, and Alexa started screaming that they were coming to take her away. She grabbed onto my leg so hard her fingernails dug into my skin through my jeans. I held her while she thrashed and cried, then remembered what Rania said about keeping a behavior log. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down everything. The time, what triggered her, how long it lasted, what helped calm her down. That evening after Alexa was in bed, I remembered the grow light from her science project. I pulled the battery pack from her backpack and put the batteries in our TV remote. They worked perfectly, which made my stomach feel weird. I pushed the thought away because it didn't matter what really happened at the school now. The principal finally called back 2 days later while I was writing Alexa's developmental history. Her voice was cold, and she kept saying things like following protocol and district guidelines. She scheduled a meeting for next week and mentioned that Letitia Cameron from the district office would be there too. After I hung up, I called Rania, who told me to file a formal records request for all of Alexa's school files. She said I needed to cite the right education codes and request any previous incident reports or behavior notes. I spent 2 hours writing the letter and making sure every word was perfect. Knowledge felt like the only thing I had any control over. 3 days later, Allie Finch came back with more paperwork for his follow-up visit. The safety plan was 6 pages long with requirements about securing potential weapons and maintaining supervision. We had to show proof of therapy attendance and follow all the rules, or they could remove Alexa from our home. The requirements felt like too much, but I knew we had to follow them. The psychology appointment finally came, and I drove Alexa to Omar Rivas's office downtown. She wouldn't get out of the car at first, and I had to carry her inside. Omar was younger than I expected, with a calm voice that seemed to help Alexa relax. He let her play with toys while he watched and took notes about how she lined them up in patterns. He had her draw pictures and noticed how she pressed too hard with the crayons, and got upset when lines weren't straight. After an hour, he came out to talk to me while Alexa played with blocks in his office. He mentioned rigidity and anxiety and possible sensory processing issues. He wanted to do comprehensive testing, but said we should start with twice-weekly sessions right away. I scheduled every appointment he had available and added them to our calendar that was getting fuller every day with lawyers and meetings and therapy. I picked up the phone Monday morning to call our homeowner's insurance while my husband took Alexa to get breakfast. The first person I talked to kept putting me on hold to check with supervisors about whether we even had coverage for something like this. She transferred me to someone else who asked me to explain everything again from the beginning. That person sent me to a third representative who finally pulled up our policy and started reading through the liability section. She confirmed we had coverage up to $300,000, but then she said something about intentional acts that made my whole body go cold. She explained that if Alexa meant to hurt her teacher, then the insurance might not pay anything at all. They'd send an adjuster to call me within 48 hours to start their investigation. I hung up and wrote down everything she'd said in my notebook. 2 days later at Alexa's therapy appointment, I watched through the one-way mirror as she played with Omar's toys. She picked up 2 stuffed bears and made them face each other while Omar sat quietly taking notes. The smaller bear kept saying sorry to the bigger one over and over in this tiny voice that broke my heart. Omar wrote something down and circled it twice on his clipboard. After 20 minutes, Alexa put the bears down and started coloring instead, but she kept looking back at them sitting together on the shelf. Omar came out to talk to me while his assistant stayed with Alexa, and told me this was the first time she'd shown any kind of indirect remorse for what happened. He said it was a small step, but an important one that meant she was starting to process the incident. I held on to that tiny bit of hope for the rest of the day. That weekend, my phone buzzed with a text from Cecil's mom canceling their Saturday playdate. She said something came up, but I knew the real reason. The parent group chat that usually had 50 messages a day about school events and birthday parties went completely quiet whenever I posted anything. People who used to wave at the grocery store now looked away when they saw me coming down the aisle. We were becoming the family nobody wanted to be associated with. Sunday night, someone I barely knew forwarded me a Facebook post that made me sick to my stomach. Mrs. Houston's husband had written about his wife's injury, and how much pain she was still in weeks later. He described watching her limp around their house and wake up crying from nightmares about being attacked. He sounded angry but not mean. Just a husband watching his wife suffer and not knowing how to help her. I read it 3 times, feeling both defensive about my daughter and genuinely sorry for what their family was going through. I couldn't sleep that night, so I went to the basement and pulled out all of Alexa's old school projects from kindergarten and first grade. I spread them across the floor and really looked at them for the first time. Her handwriting was perfect in a way that wasn't normal for a 6-year-old. Every letter was exactly the same height, and the lines were so straight they looked traced. I found one assignment she'd done about her favorite animal, and there were eraser marks everywhere from her fixing tiny imperfections. At the bottom of the pile, I found 7 copies of the same book report from first grade. She'd rewritten the entire thing 7 times because she didn't like how one letter looked. The signs of her perfectionism and anxiety had been there all along, but I just thought she was dedicated to doing good work. Rania called Tuesday afternoon while I was making lunch, and her voice told me it was bad news before she even said the words. The official demand letter had arrived at her office requesting $800,000 in damages. She read parts of it to me over the phone, listing Mrs. Houston's medical bills, the wages she'd lost from missing work, ongoing therapy costs, and compensation for pain and suffering. Rania said she'd start preparing our response, but warned me this was just the beginning of a long legal process. I sat at my kitchen table after we hung up, trying not to think about losing our house. The next morning, I got an email from someone named Tamara Shields at our insurance company. She'd been assigned as our adjuster and attached a reservation of rights letter that was 6 pages of legal language. The basic message was, they'd defend us for now, but if the investigation showed Alexa's act was intentional, they might not pay any claims. She scheduled a phone interview for Friday and said she'd need to record my statement about what happened. It wasn't the full support I'd hoped for, but at least they weren't dropping us completely. Thursday's therapy session focused on teaching Alexa ways to handle frustration without exploding. Omar showed her how to take deep breaths by pretending to blow up a balloon slowly. He gave her a stress ball shaped like a star and taught her to squeeze it while counting to 10. They practiced together with Omar pretending to be frustrated about something and showing Alexa how to use the techniques. We took the stress ball home and practiced every night before bed. I found myself using the breathing exercises too, when I felt overwhelmed by everything happening. The house felt calmer with these new routines, even though the bigger problems hadn't gone away. Saturday afternoon, I had to drive past Lincoln Elementary to get to the pharmacy, and didn't think to take a different route. As soon as Alexa saw the school building, she started screaming and gasping for air. I pulled into a parking lot and climbed into the back seat to help her breathe through the panic attack. It took 15 minutes to calm her down enough to keep driving. After that, I mapped out new routes to everywhere we needed to go that avoided the school completely. Every normal errand now required planning to make sure we wouldn't trigger another meltdown. Monday brought a letter from the school district scheduling a pre-hearing conference for next Tuesday. Letitia Cameron from the district office would present their position about the expulsion, while we'd have a chance to explain our side. Rania spent 2 hours on the phone preparing me for what to expect, and warning me the district would protect itself legally above everything else. She said we needed to focus on Alexa's right to an education, and push for accommodations instead of expulsion. The meeting was our chance to negotiate before things went to a formal hearing. I added it to my calendar between therapy appointments and insurance calls, watching our life fill up with damage control. Tuesday evening, my phone rang while I was helping Alexa with her new breathing exercises, and the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end spoke quietly and said her daughter was in Alexa's class, and she'd been thinking about calling for days. She told me Mrs. Houston had made her daughter cry 3 times this year over tiny rule violations like using the wrong color folder or forgetting to put her name in the upper right corner instead of the left. She said 4 other parents had similar stories, but nobody ever complained officially, because Mrs. Houston was considered one of the best teachers for test scores. The mom said she wasn't taking sides, but wanted me to know Alexa wasn't the only kid who struggled with Mrs. Houston's strictness. I thanked her and wrote down everything she said, even though Rania had already warned me that other kids having problems wouldn't help our legal case. After hanging up, I went to the office supply store and bought the biggest 3-ring binder they had, plus dividers and sheet protectors. I spent the entire night organizing every piece of paper related to this mess into sections. Medical records from the pediatrician went first, then all of Alexa's school papers from the past 3 years showing her grades and teacher comments. I added the therapy appointment notes Omar had given us, every letter from Rania's office, the insurance correspondence, and the police report copy I'd requested. I printed emails from the school, and even included Alexa's old report cards that showed she'd never had behavioral issues before. The binder grew to 4 inches thick, and I had to buy reinforcement rings to keep it from breaking. When Rania saw it at our next meeting, she said my organization would definitely help, since judges liked parents who took things seriously and kept good records. Ali showed up for his 3rd home visit on Thursday morning, and this time he asked more personal questions about our family situation. He wanted to know who could help us if there was an emergency, and I had to admit we didn't have much backup. My parents lived in Florida, and my husband's family was in California. Most of our friends had kids at Lincoln Elementary, and they'd been keeping their distance since the incident. Ali suggested I think about asking neighbors for emergency contact permission, and maybe joining a local parent support group. He wrote down some resources, but the look on his face told me he was concerned about our isolation. I realized how alone we'd become when I couldn't name a single person nearby who would take Alexa if something happened to us. Friday afternoon, Rania's assistant called to say a package had arrived that I needed to see right away. I drove to her office and found her in the conference room with a laptop ready. The school district had finally sent the security camera footage from the science fair, after Rania filed 3 formal requests and threatened legal action. She warned me it would be hard to watch, but I needed to see exactly what happened. The video showed the gymnasium from above with kids and parents moving around the science fair displays. I spotted Alexa in her purple dress standing by her project and checking everything constantly. The timestamp showed 8:47 when Mrs. Houston approached and pointed at Alexa's papers. I watched my daughter's face change as she realized her mistake and saw her run from the gym. The camera kept recording and showed Mrs. Houston standing near, but not touching Alexa's display while other people walked past. At 8:56, Alexa came running back into frame holding the pen and her rewritten papers. She went straight to her project and tried the grow light, which didn't turn on. The next part happened fast, with Alexa turning toward Mrs. Houston and yelling something before lunging forward with the pen raised. Mrs. Houston tried to step back, but Alexa moved too quickly, and the pen went into her thigh. The teacher fell backward, and other adults rushed over while Alexa dropped to the ground sobbing. Rania stopped the video, and I sat there accepting what I'd been avoiding. Nobody sabotaged anything, and Mrs. Houston hadn't done anything wrong. My daughter had attacked her teacher over a dead battery, and her own overwhelming anxiety about winning. That weekend, I finally stopped looking for excuses, and started trying to understand what was really happening with Alexa. At our Monday therapy session, I asked Omar directly why Alexa would think someone sabotaged her project when the video clearly showed nobody touched it. He explained that extreme anxiety in children could actually change how they perceive events. When Alexa's stress peaked after finding the dead battery, her brain created an explanation that made sense to her in that moment. She truly believed Mrs. Houston had broken the light, because that felt more real than accepting that sometimes batteries just die. Omar said this kind of distorted thinking was common in anxious kids, and we needed to help Alexa learn to recognize when her feelings were affecting her perception of reality. He started working with her on identifying thoughts versus facts using simple worksheets. During our Thursday session, Omar brought up planning for Alexa's educational future, since she couldn't return to Lincoln Elementary. He explained 2 options called a 504 plan and an IEP that would give Alexa special accommodations at her new school. We talked about things like sensory breaks, where she could go to a quiet room when overwhelmed, modified testing environments so she could take tests alone without time pressure, and behavioral intervention plans that would help teachers understand her triggers. He said with the right supports, Alexa could succeed academically while learning to manage her anxiety. Planning these accommodations made me feel like she actually had a future beyond this crisis. I spent hours that night researching special education law and writing a formal letter to the school district, requesting a comprehensive evaluation for Alexa. I cited her behavioral and emotional needs, and specifically asked for assessments in all areas of suspected disability. Letitia called me 2 days later to explain the timeline, which felt impossibly long. The district had 60 days to complete all testing, and another 30 days after that to determine placement and services. She said the process was slow but legally required, and rushing it could mean Alexa wouldn't get proper supports. I added her timeline to my calendar and tried not to think about how we'd manage 3 more months of uncertainty. The insurance company finally assigned us a defense attorney named Marcus, who called to explain our coverage. He said our policy would pay up to $300,000 for the lawsuit, but we had a $5,000 deductible we'd need to pay first. Our premiums would definitely go up next year, and might even triple depending on the final settlement. He explained that having any coverage was good, since many homeowners' policies excluded intentional acts by children. The insurance would also pay for his legal services, which was a relief since Rania's bills were already adding up. He said he'd work with their attorney to negotiate the best possible settlement within our policy limits. Rania called the next morning to explain something that made my stomach drop. She said as Alexa's parents we could be held personally liable for not recognizing and addressing her issues before they led to violence. If Mrs. Houston's attorney could prove we ignored warning signs, or should have known Alexa needed help, we might owe damages beyond what insurance would cover. She mentioned cases where parents had to pay hundreds of thousands from their own assets because courts found them negligent. We started discussing payment plans and whether we'd need to sell the house if the judgment exceeded our insurance. The possibility of losing everything we'd worked for while also trying to help Alexa felt crushing. I spent 3 days writing and rewriting an apology letter to Mrs. Houston that would express genuine sorrow without admitting legal fault. Every word mattered since anything I wrote could be used in court. I wrote about understanding her pain and fear, hoping she was healing well and regretting that this happened. I didn't mention Alexa by name or discuss details of the incident. Rania reviewed 7 drafts before approving the final version, which she would deliver through Mrs. Houston's attorney. The next therapy session, Omar pulled out a big chart with cartoon faces showing different emotions and asked Alexa to point to how she felt about what happened at the school. She stared at it for 10 minutes before finally touching 3 faces and saying the words out loud for the first time. Mad, scared, not fair. Omar nodded and told us that naming emotions was the first step to managing them, so we started practicing every night before bed with Alexa picking 3 feeling words from a list I made and stuck on her bedroom wall. My phone buzzed during dinner 2 nights later with a text from another mom at Lincoln Elementary asking if I'd seen what was going around Facebook. I opened the link she sent and found a meme someone had made using Alexa's school photo with the words, "When the science fair doesn't go your way," written across the top and a bloody pen photoshopped into her hand. The comments underneath were even worse, with parents calling my daughter a psycho and saying she should be locked up. I screenshot everything and sent it to Rania, who called me back within minutes, telling me not to respond no matter how badly I wanted to defend Alexa. She said she'd document everything for our records and contact Facebook about removing it, but warned me that once something spreads online, it's almost impossible to stop. I spent the rest of that night forcing myself not to type angry responses to people who didn't know anything about my daughter or what really happened. Letitia Cameron called the next morning to schedule the school mediation for the following week with a neutral facilitator from the district office. Rania came over that afternoon to prep me for what to expect, and we spent 3 hours practicing how I'd respond to different accusations they might make. She made me repeat key phrases about focusing on Alexa's educational needs and not getting defensive when they brought up the stabbing. We went through scenarios where they'd blame my parenting or say Alexa was too dangerous for any school, and Rania taught me how to redirect the conversation back to finding solutions. The mediation happened in a conference room at the district office with me and Rania on one side of the table, and Letitia plus the principal and district lawyer on the other. The facilitator was an older woman who kept reminding everyone to stay focused on Alexa's best interests, while the principal described the incident in detail that made it sound even worse than it was. After 4 hours of back and forth, we finally reached an agreement where Alexa would stay suspended for the rest of the semester, but wouldn't be expelled. She'd transfer to Riverside Elementary across town, continue mandatory counseling, and follow a strict behavior plan. I signed the papers, feeling both relieved that she could stay in the school and sad that she'd never go back to Lincoln, where she'd been since kindergarten. 3 days later, we had our first civil settlement conference at Rania's office with Mrs. Houston's lawyer on speakerphone. Our insurance company's lawyer offered $50,000 to settle everything, but Mrs. Houston's attorney laughed and said they wanted the full $300,000 policy limit, plus another $200,000 from us personally. Rania muted the phone and warned me this could drag on for months with depositions and court dates and mounting legal bills. The conference ended with no agreement, and another meeting scheduled for next month. Ali Finch showed up for what he said would be his final home visit the following Tuesday. He walked through the house, checking that we still had all the safety measures in place, and reviewed Alexa's therapy attendance records. After an hour of questions, he smiled and said he was closing our case with no finding of neglect or abuse. He recommended we keep up with therapy and praised how cooperative we'd been through the whole investigation. I managed to hold it together until I got to my car in the driveway, where I sobbed for 20 minutes from pure relief. Omar had been doing comprehensive testing with Alexa for weeks, and finally had results to share at our next appointment. He explained that Alexa had severe anxiety disorder with sensory processing issues and showed several traits consistent with autism spectrum disorder, though she was high functioning. Everything suddenly made more sense, like why she'd always needed her socks to feel exactly right, or why she'd have meltdowns when plans changed. Omar created a detailed treatment plan that included continued therapy twice a week, possible medication once we consulted with a psychiatrist, and specific accommodations she'd need at her new school. Having an actual diagnosis instead of just calling her difficult felt like we could finally move forward with real help. Alexa's first day at Riverside Elementary was set for Monday with a modified schedule where she'd only attend mornings at first. The counselor, Mrs. Park, met with us the Friday before to show us the quiet room where Alexa could go when she felt overwhelmed, and explained how she'd check in with Alexa every day before lunch. We practiced the route from the parking lot to her new classroom and met her teacher, who seemed genuinely kind and already knew about Alexa's needs from the behavior plan. Monday morning, Alexa clung to my hand in the parking lot, but let Mrs. Park walk her inside, and I spent the next 3 hours sitting in my car in case the school called. When I picked her up at noon, she wasn't crying and said one girl had shared her crackers at snack time, which felt like a massive victory. The legal bills were piling up faster than I could track them, with Rania charging $300 an hour, and Omar's testing costing thousands, even with insurance covering part. I set up payment plans with everyone and cut every expense I could think of, including canceling cable and switching to generic groceries. My husband started taking weekend shifts at the warehouse while I spent hours researching assistance programs for families with special needs kids, but most had waitlists years long. That's when our next-door neighbor knocked on our door holding a casserole and quietly offered to watch Alexa after school on Wednesdays, so I could work part-time somewhere. She said she'd noticed we were going through something hard and wanted to help without making a big deal about it. I started crying right there on my porch because that small kindness meant we might actually make it through this without losing the house. The insurance defense lawyer called 3 days later with papers for me to sign and told me he'd filed motions to limit damages since Mrs. Houston had returned to work after only 2 weeks off. He spent 40 minutes walking me through legal terms I barely understood while I took notes on the back of an old grocery list. The motions wouldn't stop the lawsuit but might keep the final number lower, and he seemed confident we'd stay within policy limits, though nothing was guaranteed. I hung up and immediately drove to Omar's office where Alexa was working on something at his art table with markers spread everywhere. She'd drawn a picture of flowers with the words, "I'm sorry," written in purple crayon underneath, and Omar explained she wanted to make an apology card for Mrs. Houston. We spent the next hour helping her write simple sentences about feeling bad for hurting someone, while Omar guided her through understanding that saying sorry didn't make everything okay, but was still important. The card went into an envelope that Rania would send through the lawyers since direct contact wasn't allowed. 2 weeks later, the school district called with their evaluation results, and I sat in a conference room while 3 specialists explained that Alexa qualified for special education services under the emotional disturbance category. They showed me test scores and behavior charts and observation notes that painted a picture of a kid who needed way more support than regular classroom teachers could provide. Her new 504 plan included 15-minute sensory breaks every 2 hours, extended time on all assignments, preferential seating away from distractions, and a detailed behavior intervention plan with specific de-escalation strategies. The paperwork took 2 hours to complete, and I signed my name 27 times on different forms. Progress at Riverside Elementary stayed slow with Alexa, still only attending mornings, but she'd stopped having meltdowns during transitions and could sit through circle time without fidgeting constantly. The aide assigned to her kept a daily log that I reviewed every afternoon, tracking triggers and successful interventions and patterns we were starting to recognize. 3 months of legal back and forth finally ended when both insurance companies agreed to mediation, and our lawyer called with a settlement offer of $175,000. Medical bills would be covered completely. Mrs. Houston would get $60,000 for pain and suffering, and the rest would go to their lawyers' fees. Our insurance premiums would triple starting next year, but we wouldn't lose coverage, and more importantly, we'd keep the house. I signed the settlement papers at Rania's office while my husband sat next to me looking exhausted but relieved. Family therapy started the following week with all 3 of us in a small room learning to talk about feelings without yelling or shutting down. The therapist taught us morning routines that helped Alexa wake up calm, and evening routines that helped her wind down without screens. We practiced using feeling words and taking breaks when things got heated, and slowly the house started feeling less like a war zone. 4 months after that terrible science fair day, I was folding laundry in the living room again, and realized I wasn't jumping every time a car drove past. Alexa was upstairs doing homework with her aide, and hadn't had a major incident in 3 weeks. Mrs. Houston had healed completely, according to the final medical report our lawyer forwarded, and was back to teaching full-time. The financial stuff wasn't easy with payment plans for therapy and tripled insurance premiums, but we were managing with my part-time job and my husband's overtime. I'd learned to spot Alexa's warning signs now, like when she started picking at her fingernails, or her voice got that high, tight sound. We kept strict routines with breakfast at exactly 7:15, and homework starting at 4:30, and bedtime stories at 8 sharp, because predictability helped her stay regulated. The morning school routine now took 45 minutes instead of 15, with me walking Alexa all the way to her classroom where her aide was waiting. We'd review her calm-down strategies in the car, like counting to 10 and squeezing her stress ball and taking deep breaths. At the classroom door, I'd talk to the aide about how Alexa slept and what her mood was like at breakfast, and any concerns I had about the day. Then came the careful handoff where the aide would engage Alexa in conversation about something she liked while I said goodbye, and left without dragging it out. Both of us still felt anxious every single morning, but we were functioning and moving forward with all these support systems keeping us stable. The psychiatrist had started Alexa on anxiety medication that seemed to take the sharpest edges off her reactions, and Omar continued seeing her twice a week for therapy. The principal at Riverside checked in monthly to review Alexa's progress and adjust her plan as needed. Life definitely wasn't normal or easy, but it was manageable and getting slightly better each week. Well, that's gonna wrap it up for me today. Kinda makes you stop and think about things, huh? Appreciate you hanging out and wondering through it all with me. Subscribe for more content like this.